This video is a continuation of last week's, where me and 4 YouTubers roleplayed the Paris Peace Treaties that ended World War I. If you haven't watched that one yet, I will spoil the end results of that one in this video. Alright, so final chance to click away. This is the map we ended up with in that video. Now a couple of things stand out immediately. Southern Germany has gone to the Habsburgs have barely lost any territory, and Serbia and Bulgaria are in a union. Oh, and yeah, all 3 original Entente members have turned communist. How did this happen? Well, America really wanted to create a large, independent Arab state, but France and Britain sought to carve out their own empires in the region. When the Americans came out on top in negotiations by giving the Italians Albania and Dalmatia, the very upset French and British delegates both declared revolution. Following this revolutionary declaration, a federative union formed between the two, with their intentions to overthrow the other European states was not very well hidden. In response, America, Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy declared their intention to stamp out this revolution. But would it really be this simple? This video will be following 2 timelines. In the first, the communists do indeed emerge victorious. In the second, the old order manages to restore the French and British capitalist regimes. With how this scenario is set up, both are somewhat possible, they just depend on 2 key factors. First, how smooth is the revolution? This scenario is obviously completely unrealistic. In 1920, there would have been little popular support for revolution in France or Britain. So, do we just allow the YouTubers to declare revolution and have them coup the nation easily, or do we take the more realistic route and see major civil wars break out in the newly communist states? Which one of these we choose is instrumental in deciding the victor. Then secondly, does the US fight? There is still a major anti-war movement in the US, which in the right conditions may just pull them out of the war entirely. So we will discuss both possibilities in this video, starting with the communist victory. We assume 2 successful and mostly peaceful coups take over France and Britain, somehow turning them communist overnight with little to no resistance. The first thing that happens is the French and the British attempt to buy American neutrality. The British Navy is still more powerful at this point and uses the surprise element to inflict defeats upon American ships. But what's even scarier is that some 700,000 American soldiers are still in France, with no way home and surrounded by French and British forces. Despite Wilson's explicit calls to continue the war against the communists, it does become a controversial issue within the United States. Then, the British approach the Americans with a deal: complete freedom of the seas, the safe return of American troops in Europe, and the promise to repay all debts to the US in gold, preventing a likely recession should Britain default on this debt. With this deal in place, the anti-war crowd manages to come out on top. The deal is accepted and America leaves the conflict. This leaves the continuation war mostly contained to Europe, as the battle lines are now officially drawn. The Bolsheviks announce an alliance with the West, expanding the war into an all-out European one for ideology. But the Central Powers immediately face severe issues. Especially without America, the British achieve naval supremacy again, restarting their harsh blockade. While neither side is ready yet for a full-scale offensive, the economies of Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy are already starting to unravel. But it's Austria-Hungary that is truly the weak link. In our timeline, Austria-Hungary wasn't actually destroyed by the Entente powers in the peace deal. By the time the peace deal was signed, it already looked like this. This means that, to achieve the borders we got at our alternate conference, the great powers would need to force a reunification of an already collapsed empire. Why does this matter? Because now, upon the outbreak of another war, Austria-Hungary still has to deal with the same nationalist revolutions. Likely, several of these would align with the communist revolutionaries, making the Central Powers' position even worse. While the Central Powers attempt to scramble an army, France and Britain have all the advantages. Germany just isn't strong enough anymore to halt the West, while Austria-Hungary is actively collapsing. The war would still take several months, maybe even years, but the end result is always the same. Joint invasions from the east and the west will cause the full collapse of the Germans, after which it's only a matter of time before Italy too falls. The guns fall silent for the second time in 2 years. The post-war world would see the Soviets regain Finland, the Baltics and Poland. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is destroyed by its nationalities, while both Germanys, as well as Italy, become communist nations as well. These 5 Western European powers are then scheduled to form a new major European communist federation. And considering the European colonies, most of the world is now under control of the communists, with the remaining minor states in Europe having little choice but to comply with the new world order. But hey, at least America got their loans back. That is, assuming the communists even respect that agreement now that Europe is under their control. Now sadly, there is little point in continuing this scenario any further, considering we know absolutely nothing about the politics of the communist regime that has just come into control of most of the world. I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with the 2 videos I release every single week, consider doing so. Thank you. So, that was the first scenario, assuming the communist revolutions are smooth and the US backs out of the war. But those facts are far from guaranteed. While France had a moderately large radical socialist bloc, Britain didn't. In both nations, we can assume that after the communists couped the government, a major counter-revolution rallies. In Britain, they would rally behind the king, especially centres around southern England, while the Irish see their chance to force full independence. Over in France, a similar story takes place, with a major amount of the rural areas rising up against the new socialist government. Now the rest of the world was already concerned about these revolutions even happening. But then, the first thing that these new leaders do, before even securing their state, is declare war on the United States. So, during their active civil wars, America supports what they consider to be the legitimate governments, soon joined by Germany and Italy. Austria-Hungary would provide minor support, but they do realize that they need to focus on internal matters first. And besides, it seems like their allies were in for an easy win. The German-American armies soon linked up to recapture northern France, ending the French Revolution within months. The British Revolution was arguably squashed even easier, as by far most of the nation would side with His Majesty's government, squashing the British Revolution as well. But despite their failures, the consequences of the war would be immense. Italy simply refuses to leave Tunisia, continuing their occupation of French territories until the French accept this loss. Furthermore, Italy would demand an expansion of their Libyan colony as well as territories in East Africa. Germany was offered the return of their colonies as well, but they refused, instead demanding a major reduction in the amount of war reparations they have to pay to the Western Entente. With that, the strange conflict was over, and peace could finally return to Europe. The New World Order can only be described as strange. America's foreign policy after, in their eyes, having saved Europe twice, returns to isolationism. America starts collecting the interest from their Entente loans, while at the same time using the fact that now all of the major European economies are destroyed to get extremely rich from exporting to the European continent. The American economy is going into absolute overdrive. Meanwhile, the former Entente is in a far worse position than in our timeline. Revolutions, even failed ones, are not very good for stability and confidence, 2 key factors for an economy. You can be sure that the British dominions, like Canada and Australia, turn away from Britain even faster. But France and Britain are also in a lot of debt, and with less money coming in from the former Central Powers and the heavy debt load to America, their economies would stagnate extremely hard during the 1920s. But the biggest change are the twin Germanys. Because of their anti-communist actions, they now return as respected nations on the international scene. Yet, the horrors of World War I have not been forgotten, leading to an awkward relationship between Germany and the West. Still, any League of Nations type organization they will be welcome to. Especially Austria-Hungary is interesting. Like discussed before, while being put together after the war, significant reform is needed to keep it together. With the inclusion of southern Germany, Germans now absolutely dominate the nation, even further increasing the need for the other nationalities to gain significant autonomy. Now in normal timelines, I would say that Austro-Hungarian reform would be too difficult to realistically accomplish. But this timeline is different, as the Habsburg monarchy has already fallen, and they are now simply taking control over their territories back with American and German backing. Immediately after the war, these would be the official internal borders of the Habsburg monarchy. A new southern German region, here in white, the Austrian portion, here in purple, the Hungarian portion, in orange, and Bosnia in pink. Immediately, significant reforms would take place. A Polish-Ukrainian Galician crown would be created, a Czech Bohemian region, Austria and Germany would merge, forming the strongest crown of the Union, while in the south, an Illyrian Croatian state would be created. Slovakia would also receive autonomy, and finally, a Transylvanian crown could be created. Each of these new crowns would receive significant autonomy, basically being independent states in all forms except foreign policy and the military. This new federation would stand at the heart of Europe, and while many, even within the empire, would call for things like Galicia should join Poland, the empire could never allow it, as it would set a precedent that might tear away a third of Habsburg territory over time. Instead, it is possible that the individual crowns sign treaties of free trade and movement with their mother nation, without ever fully breaking away from the empire. At least, not yet. Then, one region I haven't discussed is the former Ottoman Empire. How do they respond to the communist revolutions? Well, they don't. Both the crippled Ottoman Empire and the new Arab states are too busy with themselves to concern them with such an event. Maybe the Arabs invade the British colonies in the region, but this would fully depend on American pressure and guarantees to ensure that Britain accepts this new reality. Because if Britain wants to, they can easily reclaim their lands and then some when the larger war is over. It is important to note though, this new Arab state would be set up as a democratic monarchy with the more moderate Hashemites as monarchs, undoubtedly leading the Arabs to a much better future than the Wahhabist radical Saudis can. Then finally, we need to quickly discuss Asia. In both scenarios, I'd say it's likely that China and Japan side with the anti-communists, with especially Japan seeing the opportunity to seize the British and the French treaty ports along China's coast. Hong Kong is probably important enough that Japan are forced to give it back, but keeping the rest, they now have a much easier time influencing Chinese politics going forwards. With those out of the way, I can't really predict any further with either scenario. The entire fabric of the world as we know it has vanished. So, let me know in the comments how you think either of these scenarios play out and which one you consider to be the more likely option following the way we set up the world. For now, I will thank you all for watching. On screen, you should see a link to the previous video which explores how this world was even set up by negotiations by 5 YouTubers role-playing the Treaty of Versailles.